In this lesson video, we are going to deal with the structure of a GMAT passage. Believe it or not, these GMAT passages are actually quite predictable once you pick up on the structure. That is, most of them have the structure that I'm going to talk about in this video. So let's first start off with the first paragraph. The first paragraph of a GMAT passage is going to consist of a sentence or two in which a topic or study is introduced. Here we have a study by O'Reilly, and it is exploring the voting patterns of African Americans in the southern half of the United States in the first half of the century. That is the topic introduced. There's a little bit more, though. Oftentimes they're going to extend that because you can't just say, here's the topic, let's move on to the second paragraph. You actually have to show that something is up for debate, or you have to describe in more detail exactly what these voting patterns are. In this case, we have the structure word, nonetheless. Nonetheless shows us what follows it is going to become very important to the rest of the passage, and that is, scholarship has begun to challenge some of O'Reilly's assumptions. So you can anticipate now that the second paragraph is going to, of course, deal with what O'Reilly's findings were, how he displaced some of the assumptions of his time, but more importantly, it's going to focus also on how O'Reilly's assumptions were challenged. And why this is so helpful is just from the first paragraph alone, you can anticipate what is going to come next. Now, let's return really quickly to this first paragraph. You'll notice that a lot of it isn't that important, meaning you don't have to try to absorb every single piece of information here, thinking everything is important. You're looking for two things. What is the topic or the study, and what is going to come in the subsequent paragraphs based on the last sentence of the paragraph, which is right here. And of course, we have what is often common as well to the first paragraph, a structure word. And that structure word isn't just any structure word. It is a structure word that shows contrast. The GMAT loves the word however. However is one of their typical structure words, contrast structure words. Here we have the word nonetheless. Other words include though, although, and even though. There aren't really too many other ones that the GMAT uses, so just being aware that, hey, there's that structure word and I better pay attention to what follows makes understanding paragraphs like this one a lot easier, because now you're focusing on just a few lines and you're able to move on confidently to the next paragraph knowing what's going to happen. Now, instead of moving on to the second paragraph of that passage, we're going to try another passage, and this here is the first paragraph to this new passage. And what we have is, again, the introduction to the topic. The view that the brain is unable to regenerate was long ago overturned with the view that the brain is plastic. Notice I skipped a lot of those words. And in a way, that's what you want to be doing. Not wholesale skipping them, jumping over, but skimming them till you get to that important part. So after you read the sentence, you can say, aha, it's about how long ago there was a view that the brain wasn't plastic, but now there is this view that the brain is plastic. Now, it's also important to note that they bring up words that are used in a different vein, not the way we're used to. And when they do that, whether they're technical words or words that have a second meaning like plastic, they'll usually give you a definition, which is here. So this may be important to you as well, understanding what it means for the brain to be plastic. What's more important, though, once you understand that, is to notice the structure word however. However, again, is the contrasting structure word. So we know that there's a contrast, not necessarily with the author's view or an O'Reilly, meaning some researcher, what he or she thinks, but with these recent studies versus studies that had once overturned the common notion that the brain wasn't plastic. So now we have these recent studies that show what? That the brain is even more plastic than thought. And so that's going to be the focus of this passage. Of course, there's nothing very specific here, but we do have recent studies. And so we know that they're probably going to describe recent studies in the following paragraph. Now here, of course, we can see the important part. I've highlighted here the definition, the view itself, and of course, there's the structure word. So you're ready to go into the next paragraph, which is describing a theory. Going back to the O'Reilly passage, this would have described what was O'Reilly's theory about voting patterns. What were his assumptions? What was he thinking? Here we're describing what? the actual experiment, the research that was done that shows that the brain is more plastic than thought. So we have this long researcher experiment described here. We have a very long, scary word, oligodendrocytes. But the point of this lesson video is to show you the structure, not to actually dissect the meaning of the paragraph. This is something we're going to be doing in the very next video with this passage. And this passage is actually one that we're going to use throughout the lessons. There will be a couple of other passages in there as well, but this will be the main one. So don't feel that you have to pause this right now and read this and understand it. We will actually, again, go through each paragraph of this passage in the following video. Speaking of paragraphs, we have here the third paragraph, which is criticize the theory, make qualifications. Now, before I describe that, let's talk about why I have here second or third paragraph. The thing with the GMAT is you will get a variety of reading passages, but they can usually be broken down into the short passages and the long passages. Short passages are about 200 words, give or take 30 words. Long passages are 350 words or over. These long passages typically are made up of 3, though sometimes 2 paragraphs. The short passages themselves can sometimes be made up of 2 paragraphs as well. So it does get a little bit confusing. But the main point is the sequence of events in the passage, whether or not they're broken into exactly these paragraphs, is describe a topic, describe findings on that topic, and then describe objections or criticize those findings. So this will even come in sometimes a short passage, but it will be condensed. The reason I'm focusing though on the long passage in this video is because the long passage is where your mind wanders the most. It's where there's the most detail, and therefore knowing the exact structure of these long passages is going to help you most in understanding the content of those passages, as is the case here. So typically, the third paragraph will be criticize a theory, make qualifications. What does qualifications mean in this context? When you qualify something, you limit the extent of it. Specifically, let's say the author describes this experiment. Then the author says, well, this experiment has many helpful findings. There are some things it doesn't do well. So it's limiting the effect or the extent of the findings of the theory, which of course is very similar to criticizing a theory. But sometimes the word criticize can imply something very strong, such as outright disagreeing. And that's something that the GMAT clearly doesn't do. It disagrees somewhat and then usually provides evidence. So we're not, of course, going to read this entire paragraph. In fact, I've cut it off. The main point of this video was to show you that there is a predictable structure, and that structure is going to help you do a few things. What are those few things? Well, before we get there, let's quickly talk about multiple theories. Multiple theories are that sometimes you bring in another person's name, meaning that there was another researcher who disagreed with this researcher. And what did that researcher think? And the author will usually weigh in on that other theory and then come to a conclusion at the end. So again, all of this is important to know, and it's also important to know that multiple theories are more common in long passages, but you do see them now and again in the shorter passages. So the takeaway from all this is knowing structure can help you focus on important details. Again, remember the O'Reilly passage, or rather the O'Reilly paragraph. Half of that we could simplify and focus on what is important. Likewise with the brain passage, we were able to focus on the structure word, however, knowing that what comes after the however is important. What else can knowing structure do? Well, it can help you organize the information. You know where the information is, and it's easier to keep track of it in your head. So you know exactly what the paragraph talked about, and when you answer a question and have to go back to the passage, you know where to look for the information, because oftentimes questions don't give you specific lines. And then finally, knowing structure will help you anticipate what's next. This means there aren't too many surprises. You know that, aha, he's going to introduce the theory, he's going to describe the findings, and then there's going to be an objection, either the author's own or a multiple theory, meaning someone else's objection, and then sometimes the author will weigh in on that. And again, this will help you with organizing the information and focusing on the important details.